thanks everyone for coming today. Why don't we start with some introductions for all the panel guests today?
Okay, great. Hello everyone, my name is Bram. I'm subbing in for Mathijs today, who couldn't be here unfortunately. I'm with Maven 11. We are an Amsterdam-based blockchain fund, so it's happy times for us here in Amsterdam and seeing everyone of the crypto industry and also Solana ecosystem gathering here today. And yeah, we have been looking into this space, of course, for quite some time. We were active since 2017, and among other things, we are investors in these guys at Polymer. So good to see them also hosting this event. So yeah.
Yep.
And I'm Andrea. I work at the Solana Foundation. I run the grants and capital program there. Been in the space for 2.5, 3 years. And yeah, excited to see everybody here.
Hey everyone, my name is Mario. I work in research at Placeholder. Placeholder is a US-based crypto fund. We're invested in a number of crypto ecosystems from Ethereum, Bitcoin, Cosmos, and most recently also Solana. And given these investments, we're obviously also interested in the interoperability space.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for your introductions. We can kick it off maybe with a very high-level question, so anyone can answer. It's, what attracted you to the Solana ecosystem in the first place?
I think this is a very common point that you hear in this conference all the time. But of course, like the high throughput, low latency, that sort of stuff, everyone knows. But for me, especially, I was very attracted to the usability of the chain. I think that's definitely a main point for me. For example, I was the one in our team that really liked StepIn. It was the first app that I laid hands on that felt actually usable from a crypto perspective, and that felt like it was just like a Web2 app, right? And even though it was on chain, it really felt like it was meant to be like that way, and it didn't have any friction. So I really liked that, and that made me think about, especially the UX experience of Solana. It has, in my opinion, a big advantage over maybe some competitors in the space.
Nice.
Yeah, I actually still use StepIn pretty much every day. Yeah, it's fun. For me, I joined, I guess, in early 2021. For me, it was a question at that point about scalability, and also just a place from a work perspective that sort of aligned my expertise with where I could make the most impact. I got the chance to talk to Toli and Raj early on. And I'd previously worked at a company called Square in the US, does a lot of fintech stuff. And they had started looking into the blockchain for a sort of payments solution. And that ultimately led me to Solana, which is interesting because now obviously payments is a big thing about or a big focus of ours, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point.
Yeah, in our case, I'd say the original driver was definitely the technological differentiation of Solana. We recognized that early on, but from that point to actually supporting the network, it took us quite some time. And the reason was, it's not always the technology that the best technology that wins. I think this is the case in crypto, just like in other fields of technology. So obviously things like community and just building the developer ecosystem and just getting comfortable with things on that front in addition to technology. It took us some time, but we got there eventually. And obviously the fact that having this single state machine execution environment, the benefits that brings in terms of composability and user experience, I think Solana is a great home for end user consumer mass scale applications. So that's definitely been one of the driving forces behind our interest in Solana.
Yeah, thanks everyone. You guys make great points. It seems it's clear that Solana sits in an interesting trade-off space when it comes to blockchains. I guess for Andrea in particular, what efforts or areas is Solana Foundation most interested in supporting?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give you a bit of a broader answer.
Yeah.
My team is actually the capital team. So we do grants, but we also do investments and we do convertible grants, things like that. But overall, our mission is actually to make sure that builders in the Solana space can get access to funding no matter what stage, geography, or sort of size of their project. And it doesn't matter to us if the funding comes from us or it comes from investors or anybody else in the ecosystem. So that's sort of broadly what we try to do on our team. With regards to what we fund directly, 95% of what we do is grants, and we sort of do this in two ways. On the one hand, we sort of take inbound requests, right? So anybody can submit a grant request, and we look at all of them. We get roughly 300 to 400 a month. It's actually crazy how much interest there is, even in a bear market. Maybe because of the bear market, people want free money. But vertical-wise, we do cover everything. I'll say at the moment, our areas of focus are probably going to be payments infrastructure, sort of broader infrastructure grants, as well as things that are a little more sort of UX focused. Because in our opinion, generally speaking, there's a lot of potential from a technology side, like we all talked about, but we're not seeing a ton of apps, maybe like Step in a way, that are actually usable by everyday people. So that means mobile, that means a little bit of gaming, that means, again, payments, things like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrea. For the rest of the panel, what do you guys feel are areas where capital is high leverage in, I guess, enabling the growth of Solana? And also, like, how does interoperability play into those areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we saw, I think it was September, with Visa announcing their like settlements of USDC on Solana. I think that's definitely a big thing that people might not think a lot about, but it will enable a lot of things in that regard. We, for example, invest also a lot in this payment infrastructure, and it makes a lot of sense for the Visas of the world, but also maybe more crypto-native providers to start leveraging that infrastructure. I think that's definitely a big focus. Maybe not super popular, but I think also the compliance regulatory side is also something that we might need to invest in, looking at the success of real-world assets, treasuries, that sort of stuff. We see that, especially for stablecoins, this enables a lot of growth and yield opportunities, and maybe having some compliant options in that regard can be an interesting thing to look at and invest in, because, as I said, it's not that sexy to invest in that, but as we see with things like Maple Finance, for example, that also relaunched on Solana, actually, this is definitely an area that we believe in, that will see a lot of growth, especially also with institutions more and more having some interest in this space.
Not much to add. I think the things that would help with Solana's growth most are things that can uniquely benefit from the capabilities of Solana. So people or other panelists already mentioned things like payments, which is like a high throughput use case, gaming, social, really things that have the potential to become like mass market consumer applications built on top of blockchain infrastructure. So I think these are the things that have most potential in driving growth of Solana.
Gotcha. Yep.
I'll say the other vertical that was talked a lot about at the main stage, I don't know if you've been there yet, is the idea of DPIN, so decentralized physical infrastructure networks, I think. We're bad at acronyms. But we're thinking about things like Helium, we're thinking about things like Hive Mapper. So these are things that sort of operate in the real world, but sort of can leverage Solana in the back end. No one needs to know about it to allow sort of new networks and new economies to exist. So that's another sort of emphasis of ours.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Yeah, I saw something recently about decentralized Uber on chain. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's an idea that keeps coming back again and again.
Airbnb as well.
Okay. Cool. So I guess recently there was some changes in the market conditions. You have like a spot Bitcoin ETF. How are all these changes factoring in each of your perspectives on the market going into, I guess, into the year and into next year?
Yeah, I think as said, right. I think for us, the fact that institutions are getting more and more interested. I mean, we have Brevin Howard, which is a very big player coming into this with like billion. We have, of course, all these ETFs that are getting launched. I think it's really interesting to see how after all the bad news that we've had over the past 2 years, even the FTX trial is ongoing as we speak, right? That doesn't deter people from starting to invest in it and to also start to use, like for example, the Visa thing that I mentioned, to use blockchain in the space, and it's very encouraging. And I think that will, especially for Solana, will enable a lot of things. I think a monolithic chain like Solana makes a lot of sense for those type of companies that indeed want an all-encompassing solution with things like they understand high throughput, what that means. Gas costs is also something, of course, that is something from a user perspective or even from enterprise perspective, something that you don't really want to deal with. So I think that will for sure enable certain innovations. And as I said before, like real-world assets, those types of things will further find footing in this type of market. And I think that will definitely be a focus. However, I still think that also with that doesn't mean that there will be an entirely new flow of money into the system. And I don't think that's maybe necessarily needed. I think if we see a slow growth based on fundamentals and technology, it would be way better than the hopeonomics, like I call it a bit, of ETFs, skyrocketing TVL and that sort of stuff. So I think we need to take it step by step, pun intended, and go from there.
Yep.
Yeah, for us it's sort of interesting because we are there and we sort of have to be there thick or thin, right? Like bear market, bull market, we're there. And so from that point of view, like our mission and our work in the Solana ecosystem doesn't change that much, except for this sort of like counter idea of funding more during the bear market because there are more teams who sort of need that type of funding from a grants perspective. And as sort of things start to pick back up, we actually try to work with a lot of VCs and sort of funnel good projects that way so that they can create sort of they're more incentivized to sort of build out a sustaining business model instead of just relying on one-off sort of grants here and there.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, Placeholder is a venture fund, so we're long-term investors. Obviously, I mean, crypto has always moved in cycles. We're all familiar with that. Things like the Bitcoin ETF that can drive, price action, and that can bring attention from people who are into that speculative aspect of crypto more. And that intention can theoretically, in a good case, also translate into interest in the underlying technology and applications. So that can have a positive effect, but in the long run, like that can't be all. We have to continue building and developing the technology and useful applications, and that's regardless of what's happening with the market.
Yeah. Gotcha. Makes sense. So we touched on the topic of DePIN or decentralized physical infrastructure. What do you guys see? Like, how do you see Solana's role in supporting this type of infrastructure, and what does interoperability look like between like physical infrastructure and the Solana network, and maybe more broadly as well?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of interesting points there. We are really looking into decentralized compute, for example, with nice. Of course, everyone looking at AI and deep learning models and that sort of stuff. There, as I said in my, I think, first answer, the regulatory side is also very interesting now, with the US trying to restrict how that decentralized compute can be used. And I think there, a chain like Solana in like a very decentralized way can play a role where you can try to limit it with certain actions from the government, but if the genie is out of the bottle, it can be used by everyone, and like that sort of thing is really interesting for us to look at, especially like today, because it's a very big topic in that community. And I believe blockchain in general, and then Solana, of course, in particular, can enable that to prevent that censorship that currently is going on in that area.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, from, again, our perspective, we feel like there are certain experiences that are uniquely enabled by Solana, hence the marketing campaign only possible on Solana. And we feel that works particularly well with DePIN. And the reality is that whether you're building your solution on Solana or not, there are probably still going to be some advantages to ultimately maybe settling on Solana. And so for us, while we will obviously fund and think about projects that are Solana native, the interoperability piece is actually going to be an important part of the future, where people might leverage advantages of other blockchains to maybe build the product, but also benefit from Solana's sort of speed and throughput and things like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, not much to add, I guess. I realized that we didn't answer your previous question about how the kind of interoperability fits into all that, and just kind of brought that in right here. But I feel like I always think of the analogy of, well, people mention like blockchains are like cities, or I like to say that blockchains or blockchain networks are like institutions. And if you look at how institutions evolve over long periods of time, in retrospect, you often have suboptimal designs become dominant, both in technology and organizational development. And it's just because as things evolve organically, you just develop a lot of semi-permanent structures and inertia, and there's investment, like physical infrastructure investment. There's a lot of social investment, social coordination. People put, their lives into building something, and that just ties things down a lot. And why I mention this in the context of interoperability is, that's the case with these blockchain networks as well. And it's in retrospect, you might feel like, okay, we have a better design. Let's start from scratch. Let's build something that is natively interoperable from the get-go, like your vision for Cosmos or Polkadot or these alternative networks that try to kind of solve for that. But in reality, the world is more diverse, more complex. You have parallel developments happening, and you can't just wipe the slate clean. And you kind of have to deal with that. So this is also the case with Solana. Our belief is that there will be other ecosystems that have staying power in addition to Solana. And even despite the technological arguments that one can make, why developers, for example, should prefer one network for the other, regardless of that, I think we're kind of stuck with this interoperability challenge, and Solana is part of that conversation. So, interoperability with other ecosystems that can cut both ways. It can help your ecosystem to grow because it makes your network accessible to others for them to come and explore and discover all the benefits that you're bringing to the table. But it can also make you vulnerable if you're not competitive, let's say, and you get users from other networks who then realize that, hey, this user experience is actually better. So I think in the long run, that would just help drive competition even further, and that's a net benefit for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's really a question of like expanding the pie.
Yeah.
We've actually seen some interesting examples of this, not so much in DePIN yet, but in sort of the climate space. So we've seen networks like the Region Network, for example, not built on Solana, but leveraging Solana's capabilities. And I think that will be something that ultimately will expand to most verticals at some point.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Yeah, I did an interesting thought while we're on the topic of. Sorry, I keep going back to DePIN, but in some ways, you can kind of see like any sort of like off-chain compute settling on-chain as a roll-up, and I think there's been like multiple discussions about this. I guess from each of your perspectives, do you kind of see some of the physical world, be it infrastructure or otherwise, acting as sort of roll-ups that at some point settle back onto a settlement layer like Solana?
Yeah, that's that's definitely a possibility. I think if you're building this, contact us. No, but that's definitely something that can happen. But I think there's still a few steps that that projects that are looking to do this need to take.
Yeah.
I think there are some attempts out there, not necessarily leveling to Solana, but like BitTensor gets a lot of attention right now, Akash, those types of things. We are investors in Jensen that is doing that specifically. Yeah. And I think it makes sense, as I said also in my previous answer, from a decentralization standpoint, to go that route. So my answer would be, why not? Yeah.
Nice.
I think it's an interesting idea. I've heard people talk about it recently, and it's interesting because for a very long time, people talked about Solana as I don't know if antithesis is the right word, but just as a very different kind of approach to the whole modular architecture or path that Ethereum is taking. But with things like what you're describing, or also Eclipse and other, I feel like there's more convergence and more. The environment is definitely getting more dynamic, and it's Solana serving as a settlement layer for application or sector-specific rollups. That sounds a lot like what's happening in the Ethereum land. So I don't know what that does with the unique value proposition of Solana that attracted people to it. I don't know, maybe there are downsides of Solana going down that path, but I think there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, makes sense. Since we're on this topic, it seems like there's a potential for all these different ecosystems to kind of merge in some ways. I guess, what is everyone on the panel's perspective on the potential of crossover between these ecosystems that do have some staying power and will likely be around?
I think the composability of ecosystems is of course a powerful thing. I think we saw this with gaming and DeFi in the last cycle, where there were things that you put into the ground in your game, and that was like a yield-bearing token. And for example, I mean, those types of realities can only be enabled with things that we are building today. I think, especially in gaming, I'm now thinking in my head, that's definitely an area where we look at together with NFTs, for example, that in an ownership economy future, right, where you own everything that you generate, not only from like a physical standpoint, but also your IP, even your health data, that sort of stuff. You can always leverage that in a certain way in other ecosystems. I think that's definitely an interesting point of view, and that's where I think Solana really shines with their UX. That for users, these things are much easier to understand and access, as opposed to maybe some other approaches that we've seen, and some friction that is created there.
Yeah, I think generally agree with the sentiment. There are a couple of challenges that we see when we talk about integration with other chains, and generally they're technical, sort of cost perspectives, and then there's also just sort of adoption, right? With the fourth one being probably security concerns, which I generally roll up into the technical one. I think we specifically at the foundation can sort of help cover some of these, especially on the funding side. And then the way we structure our grants are usually milestone-based, so we de-risk on the adoption side. But we're currently open to actually proposals that feel they can, and we're talking to some sort of IBC-based projects about integrating Solana. The issue right now seems to be a technical one. So we'll see how it goes. But excited about it. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I come back to the earlier point I made about this organic development after leading to a suboptimal technical design. People often use the word plumbing for that. Like in all of these infrastructure, this mass scale infrastructure that we've built as a society, the plumbing often isn't very pretty, but eventually we try to kind of abstract that away, and people always talk about that. Let's improve user experience, abstract away the complexity, etc. So that's kind of my base case of how things are going to evolve with blockchain interoperability and just integrating these different systems together. And I think applications, well, it's obviously, but more generally, applications are likely to play a big role in that and just drive that forward. So as infrastructure builders, I think it's always good to put yourself also in the shoes of application developers and try to think from their perspective of how you make your infrastructure easy for them to build these user experiences that do abstract away the complexity. And that's the case for Solana or any other network as well.
Yeah, great points, everyone. I guess in terms of in light of all of the different bridge hacks and exploits in the past few years, what effect does that have on your perspective and your framework for like evaluating investment decisions, either in the interoperability space or adjacent to it?
Yeah, I don't think it should necessarily influence it too much because bridges are, unfortunately, right now the reality that we have to deal with, and we are investing heavily in making that a more safe environment and a more safe. Making that particular part much more secure. I think that's definitely something that we have to do, but it doesn't really deter us from investing in a particular ecosystem because we are afraid that a hack will happen. I mean, at any level, something can happen with code and contracts. Yep. Bridges are, of course, an extremely nice honeypot for people, but I think the question is there more about building certain standards. I think we talked about this yesterday as well. But all these projects are building their own nicely configured solution, and we see this also, of course, with the Layer 0 drama on Twitter this week. But just one standard that everyone understands, that's also accepted, that everyone can plug into safely. I think that's definitely something that's needed in this industry as well, which is, of course, hard to do with all these different technicalities being the moat, of course, from these companies, because if everyone was doing the same standard, there would not be any competition. So I think that's for us definitely something that we try to invest in, like IBC. Yeah.
We've been giving a lot more grants to sort of auditing firms and security firms, just because we think it's important, like the idea of interoperability in the future. And so we want to make sure that, sort of to your point, it's like the background is abstracted away, but it's also people feel secure and don't have to worry about it. So
yeah, I guess the track record of bridges shows that building secure bridging is hard. But it's I don't know if we think of historical examples, like when people when humans started developing airplanes, for example, there was a point in time of developing that technology where people who were maybe financing the development of that technology were asked, like, hey, like, how do you feel about financing airplanes given all these crashes that we've seen, So that's kind of how I think about that. It just takes time to develop technology, and bridges are not unique in that. It's just that given that fortunately, with airplanes, it was human lives, right? But with bridges, it's money. I mean, obviously, it's important to keep that secure. But these hacks maybe had a bit of made investors more cautious in investing in interoperability technologies, and that might not be the best thing, because we need to keep at it. I think we need to keep developing these technologies, and eventually, just like we develop safe airplanes, I think we will get to safe bridges as well. Whether that's going to be a unified standard that's, I don't know, enshrined in the core layer 1 protocols or whatever, or bespoke bridges, depending on the use case, I think we'll get there eventually. And as investors, we're definitely here to support that. Nice. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if there are any.
What is your take on the whole case around Layer 0 and the wrapped ETH with Lido?
That's a good question. Well, I think it's just them claiming it's the best thing that rubbed people the wrong way, and that's like their approach is the superior one. I don't think you should blame anyone for building something that's just like permissionless. And yeah, just there's so much interest playing on both sides that the discussion gets a bit muddled. I find it all a bit noisy, to be honest, and don't really care too much about it. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, I think there are people who are more ideological about kind of the core original ethos of crypto, of decentralization and all those things. But I believe that over time we will have more centralized components in the broader world of blockchains in terms of like businesses, traditional businesses who rely on this infrastructure, et cetera. And I think that's fine. It will help grow the industry. But the important thing is that if you're building something, you have to be forthcoming and transparent about what you're doing and communicate that so that you don't give out false impressions and create a situation where others want to come and criticize you for that, because that just creates noise and adversity, and that's not good. So just be transparent about what you're doing, and you should be fine.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that was it for questions. Yeah. Thank you to all our panelists, and yeah.
Thank you.
Great talk.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having us.